Hey everyone, Nerd here. We are on our third day of Holy Week, which is known as Spy Wednesday. This is the day that is commemorated or acknowledged as the day that Judas may have betrayed or started to betray Jesus. Wasn't the day he actually turned him over. That's the next day, according to the writings here, or the next night. It was even the Thursday night that when the betrayal actually happened. But this seems to be the moment where he finally decided to go to the chief priests and start to spy and find out a time where he can turn Jesus into the religious leaders. Now, why he decided to do that is up for a lot of debate. There is a little story here that we'll read about kind of maybe what had been the final push, but you got to think there was other things that were building up. It just isn't mentioned. So anybody that says why Judas did it is just making a maybe an educated guess, maybe a hopeful guess, revelation, whatever you want to call it, how they decided why Judas decided to betray him. I saw something that said that maybe he was just trying to push this thing along a little bit, was trying to get that the Messiah warrior out kind of thing, and thought, well, he's not really going to get captured. If they really do try, there'll be a revolt and we'll finally get this thing off the ground. But again, that's just complete conjecture. There really isn't anything that says why Judas decided to do it other than Satan just entered him. But I think it had to be something that was building up, and this may be the story that just finally said, okay, I'm going to push this thing over the edge for whatever reason. So let's go ahead and read the story. Let's start in Matthew. This account is in each one of the Gospels. So let's start in Matthew chapter 26. So I'll give you a second to get to Matthew chapter 26. We'll start in the first verse. I'm reading out of the New King James Version. Now it came to pass, when Jesus was finished all these sayings, that he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days is the Passover, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified." Then the chief priests and scribes and the elders of the people assembled at the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and plotted to take Jesus by trickery and kill him. But they said, "Not during the feast, lest there be an uproar among the people." And when Jesus was in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, a woman came to him having an alabaster flask of very costly fragrant oil, and she poured it on his head as he sat at the table. But when the disciples saw it, they were indignant, saying, "Why this waste? For this fragrant might have been sold for much and given to the poor." So you see here, it just says his disciples. It doesn't say Judas. There might be some indication it may have been Judas that was kind of pushing this narrative, or the first one to kind of speak up, because he was in charge of kind of the money or the treasury, if you will. He was the secretary of just kind of accounting for the money that was coming in to kind of keep the ministry going. There was donations that were coming in. There was oil presses that were being made. They were selling oil. They were doing other things to kind of keep the ministry going, including just donations. And he was in charge of the money bag, so to speak, is what they called it. And so it may be an indication he was the first one to say, hey, wait a minute. But you'll see maybe there was some motive behind why he was saying that too. We'll get to that in the other accounts. So let's keep reading. But when Jesus was aware of it, he said to them, "Why do you trouble the woman? For she has done a good thing for me. For you have the poor with you always, but me you do not always have. For in pouring the fragrant oil on my body, she did it for my burial. Assuredly, I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told as a memorial to her." Doesn't say her name here. There may be some indication of who this could have been. I saw some great commentary that said it may have been Lazarus's sister, that after he was raised from the dead, this was kind of her way to be able to do that. But really, it just says it's been done for his burial. So that's what we have to take is what it says here. The very next sentence here, the very next verses, chapter 26, verse 14 now reads, "Then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, 'What are you willing to give me if I deliver him to you?' And they counted out to him 30 pieces of silver from some 30 pieces of silver. So from that time, he sought opportunities to betray him." That 30 pieces of silver is very significant. There's some prophecy that that's what he'll be betrayed for. So I think that's on purpose. I think Matthew wanted to make sure that was in there, the amount that was actually given to betray Jesus. So that's what you have there, but you don't really have a reason why he did before that, why he started to do that. but there's some other hints in some of the other accounts. So now let's go over to Mark. This is going to be in chapter 14 of Mark. So I got my little ribbon. So I'm ahead of you, but I'll give you a second here. So go to Mark chapter 11. This is the account of the gospel in Mark. And it has a little nuances, little things that are interesting that I think it's worth reading. It's very similar to Matthew, but I liked reading through it. So we're starting in the first verse, chapter 14 of Mark. After 2 days, it was the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So again, I want to reiterate the fact that Passover moves days based on the calendar. Like this year, it's on Wednesday. 2023, it's on Wednesday. Last year, it was Friday. The way it's celebrated is within this Feast of Unleavened Bread, which went from a Sabbath to a Sabbath. So it's a 7-day kind of festival with Passover that was in between. So they're tied together, but they're different how they've been celebrated over the years. But I tell you, Passover, this Feast of Unleavened Bread, is one of the longest rituals of any religious group in history. I mean, it's been going on for thousands of years to commemorate the Moses bringing the people out of Egypt, out of slavery. That's what all this is. All the symbolism is supposed to be there. There's the idea of this Passover lamb that was supposed to be sacrificed to save the people. So that's tied in. That imagery is played out through all the Gospels as we get closer and closer to Easter Sunday. So let's keep reading here in chapter 14. And the chief priests and the scribes sought how they might take him by trickery and put him to death. But they said, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar of the people. And being in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, he sat at a table, and a woman having an alabaster flask of very costly oil of spikenard. So this at least gives you an indication of what spikenard is. This was very expensive perfume and in a special container. The only way you can get it is basically breaking it. So it was really designed to be for very special occasions, designed to be something very, very important, especially to the woman that had it. Then she broke the flask. And again, it doesn't say who her name is here. It doesn't have a name of who this person might have been, but just as a woman. So let's keep going on. Then she broke the flask and poured it on his head. This is Jesus's head. But there were some who were indignant among themselves and said, why was this fragrant oil wasted? For it might have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor. So again, denarii is about a day's wage. That's the most common use or common valuation of what that was, is a day's wage. So this is 300 days, almost a full year of wages that could have been sold. So you can see it was very expensive, probably filled the entire house. It probably was the most expensive oil you could possibly buy, especially with how expensive it was. And then it keeps reading here. It says, and they criticized her sharply. So this is the first time they kind of said, we're going after her. And Jesus says, leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a good work for me. For you have the poor with you always, and whenever you wish, you may do good for them. But me you do not always have. She has done what she could. She has come before to anoint my body for burial. Assuredly, I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told as a memorial to her. Then right after that, so the same kind of thing, right after that, a memorial to her, and after this little conversation about the oil, the next verses. Then Jesus Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray him to them. And when they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him money. So he sought how he might conveniently betray him. So that is the account according to Mark. Little nuances added there. Now let's go to Luke. We are going to go to the 22nd chapter of Luke. I'll give you a second to catch up there. So Luke chapter 22. Now the feast of unleavened bread drew near, which is called Passover. And the chief priests and the scribes sought how they might kill him, for they feared the people. Then Satan entered Judas, surnamed Iscariot, who was numbered among the 12. So he went his way and conferred with the chief priests and captains how he might betray him to them. And they were glad and agreed to give him money. So he promised and sought opportunity to betray him to them in the absence of the multitude. So that's the account, kind of a little bit of nuances. Again, this is in the Luke account. And I also like the fact that Luke is written to the Gentile, where the other Gospels are more likely written to Jews. So this was the account that was there. So I think there's some very big significance of why it was said the way it was to the person that was intended for this letter. So that's what it says there. And then the next thing, it goes on to preparing for the Passover. And so that's how, and then preparing for the Last Supper, which is the next day. All right, so now let's go to John. Like I said, I got my bookmarks all over, got my notes all over, so I'm ahead of you a little bit. But let's go to John. We are going to go to chapter 13. This gives us a little more nuances because I think that you can see who the disciple was might have been a little closer to this interaction of what happened and how he identified his betrayer. So there's a little nuance in John that I think is important. So we're going to start in the 18th verse. Do not speak concerning all of you. I know who I have chosen, but that the scriptures may be fulfilled. Who eats bread with me has lifted up his heel against me. Now I tell you before it comes, that when it does come to pass, you may believe that I am he. Most assuredly, I say to you, he who receives whomever I send receives me, and he who receives me receives him who sent me. So this is Jesus talking about his relationship with God the Father. That's kind of what this is talking about. Then Jesus had said these things. He was troubled in spirit and testified and said, most assuredly I say to you, one of you will betray me. Then the disciples looked at each other, perplexed about whom he spoke. Now there was leaning on Jesus' bosom one of his disciples whom Jesus loved. This disciple who Jesus loved is most likely John. From all the accounting scholarly work, it's most likely the Apostle John. So then it says, Simon Peter therefore mentioned to him to ask who it was whom he spoke. So Simon Peter kind of whispers to this disciple that Jesus loved, most likely John, and said, hey, who, nudge him, ask him who it is. Who's it going to be? Who's the one that's going to betray him? Then leaning back Jesus' breast, he said to him, Lord, who is it? Jesus answered, it is he to whom I shall give a piece of bread when I have dipped it. So he dipped it in some sort of oil or some sort of substance is what he dipped it in. And having dipped the bread, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, and the son of Simon. Now after the piece of bread, Satan entered him. Then Jesus said to him, what you do, do quickly. But no one at the table knew for what reason he said this to him. For some thought, because Judas had the money box, that Jesus had said to him, buy these things we need for the feast, or that he should go give something to the poor. Having received the piece of bread, he then went out immediately, and it was night. So that's a little interesting nuance here of John of when that might have been. It definitely is some sort of supper type thing. There's then the new command. There's a whole bunch of other wonderful things in John as we finish out the book of John. But I wanted to kind of read each of those accounts that are credited to Wednesday, or known as Spy Wednesday, when Judas made that decision to go to the leaders and then eventually find a time where he's just away and where he's at, where he's staying, to be able to lead the people to him to then eventually betray him. So tomorrow we're going to talk about Thursday. A lot of wonderful things happen on Thursday or accredited to Thursday. So I hope you stay with this journey. It's been a lot of fun reading this and going through it with you. Please like, subscribe the video. Love to have you be a part of this journey. Let me know what I got right, what I got wrong. And I just love studying this stuff. I just love being able to go through and read each account and kind of find out the story that happened during this incredible week leading up to the crucifixion and, most importantly, the resurrection of my Lord and Savior in Jesus Christ. So I hope you have a wonderful day, and God bless.